experience in the invention and development of new therapies in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry in the USA, and currently CEO of the biotech company Immune in Seattle. Welcome, Carlos. Carlos, you
Thank you. Thank you.
Right.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So first, I would like to thank the organizers, both the British Spanish Society and also thanks the collaboration of the Society of Spanish Researchers in the United Kingdom and all the sponsors for making this event possible. We also want to thank you and thank you, the audience, as I said, and we really want you to participate during the event and ask the experts all the questions that you want. Otherwise, I will keep throwing questions and without non-stop. So please do it. So I separate this Q&A session into 3 different blocks of about 20 minutes each. So to begin, we will speak about the virus and the disease. Then we will move into all the prevention strategies and treatments. And finally, we will speak about the vaccines and how the experts see the future perspective. Right? So let's begin with this subject. We're going to talk about the virus and the disease. We don't need much presentations about the disease. You already know COVID-19 is a worldwide health problem that has been responsible now of more than 41 million of people infected and more than 1 million of deaths today. But now I want to ask Nerea, I mean, you are a molecular biologist. You are specialized in different types of viruses, such as HIV, the Zika virus, other coronavirus. You know virus more than anyone else, at least more than anyone else here. Tell us what makes the SARS-CoV-2 virus a different virus we compare to other viruses like the common flu virus or other common coronavirus like those causing colds or whatever.
Okay, so I think that the first thing for us is like this virus, SARS-CoV-2, is a new virus for us. So we have never encountered this type of virus. Well, not this type of virus, but this virus itself. So so we can get infected with this virus, and we are just basically going to be naive to the virus. So we don't know how to combat this disease because none of us has been exposed to this virus before. So normally we have been getting infected with flu virus. Every year we have this seasonal flu and also with another coronaviruses that cause like the common cold. But for us, this SARS-CoV-2 is completely new. So this is why we are completely naive and we don't know how to combat this. And this is one of the problems when we see like so many infections because I mean, none of us has any protection against this virus. And this is why it's so different for us.
Okay. And the main difference between this coronavirus and the common flu virus?
Well, yes, there are many differences at the type of genetic level as well. So they're similar in the sense that they can cause respiratory diseases, but they're like completely different in terms of the genomic material that they do have. They do have RNA, both of them, but one has a negative sense that has different implications, and this one has a positive sense.
Okay. So I wanted to make this difference because, you know, at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the messages were like, it probably will be something similar to flu, but the only similar is probably some of the symptoms, but nothing to do with similarities between virus, rather than the fact that you can get infected by respiratory tract. So, Carlos.
This is one of the things that they do behave in a similar way in terms of how it's spread and how you can get infected, but it's completely different in the terms of how the virus itself behaves.
And also how the disease developed. I want to ask Carlos now. You are a medical doctor. You are specializing in internal medicine, infectious disease, and immunology. You know the disease pretty well. Tell us what are the difference between COVID-19 and flu in terms of, I mean, symptoms and the damage that is doing to the body.
So thank you.
COVID especially different. Sorry.
No, so two quick comments. One is that To Nerea's point, there has been little exposure or no exposure to COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, but the flu changes every year, as you all know, mutates a lot. And thankfully, despite the awful epidemic we're having, or pandemic, the good thing with coronavirus is that they do not change as the frequency or the severity as the flu does, right? So keep that in mind as we talk about vaccines and maybe neutralizing antibodies. Clinically, at the beginning, when you get the typical flu symptoms, it's a very common symptoms between both of them. The main difference comes in the second wave. Normally, once you get over the flu, when your immune system has built up enough responses against the flu virus will shut down and will cause, in some patients who are older, an immunosuppressive state, meaning people with flu when they are over their 70s, they may die from sequela from the flu. They do not die directly from the flu, but people die from bacterial pneumonia. So it's very typical for a nursing home patient to die in the nursing home with a pneumonia that is caused by a bacteria, mainly Staphylococci. So that's what one culprit of the flu. The flu suppresses even more the immune system once it's kind of done its own job. Contrary, in the coronavirus, there is really no immunosuppression caused by the virus, but just the opposite. It causes a huge inflammation. So people who are dying from COVID today are people who are having complications from the infection itself, because the virus attacks and activates tremendously the immune system of one type. So you get what we call a huge amount of inflammation that can cause your lungs to collapse. It can cause a lot of clots on your blood. And you start seeing patients dying with renal failure, with heart problems. And it's not per se the virus that was there 10 days ago. It's just the virus has attacked a number of organs by causing inflammation. So that will be important as we talk about the therapies that we can do. Yeah. The one thing that is common to both of them, and you need to understand this, is that when any one of us gets a virus infection, whether it's COVID or whether it's the flu, our initial immune system that gets brought up or waken up to fight the virus is very important. And the reason we're seeing many more people that are over 60 or 70 having big problems is that the initial immune response against the virus is very, very weak. The same happens against the immune response against the flu. And so that's a common thread between both of them. And so the main explanation as to why people who are older get more severity is that the initial immune response against the coronavirus is very weak, it's not efficient, and that allows the virus to grow very much. When it grows very much, it causes these sequelae that we're talking. And so it's even more critical for us to be thinking of therapies that will make that initial immune response stronger. So when a patient gets that virus, you are protected to some degree. So that's the common thing between both of them.
Perfect. So this is very important because in the second subject, we will talk about therapies. And to understand therapies, the current therapies that are in place, it's important to understand the damage that this virus causes in the organism. As Carlos has said, a problem in the immune system. There are also a huge inflammation spread all over the body, the heart, the vessels, and the lungs, but also a vascular damage also that causes microcoagulations that can be lethal at the end. We will come back to this subject when we will speak about the treatments. But let's learn a bit more about the virus, because Nerea, some people, including Chinese scientists that I cannot pronounce the name now. I was trying to understand how to pronounce it for I introduced to you, but is believing that the SARS-CoV-2 is not a natural virus and rather it was created in a laboratory. What do you think about that? Why can't we be sure that it was not created in a laboratory, and where, if it's, where does SARS-CoV-2 come from?
Well, actually, the virus is what is called a zoonosis. So it's an animal virus that has been able to jump the barrier species and now it's able to infect humans. And that's something that, well, the most related coronavirus that we have to this one is actually a bat coronavirus. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, like, the differences, the genetic differences between this bat coronavirus and the one that we have now basically indicated that we're the same virus, but 70 years ago. So during all this time, this virus has been somehow evolving and mutating to get adapted into humans. And why we are sure, well, I think one of the things that people were saying about this, that the virus was created in a lab, is because in Wuhan, there was a high security laboratory in which they were handling some of these bad coronaviruses. And they just basically said that, well, they have been just changing this virus in the lab until they have been able to infect humans. And that has been an accident. So actually, that's not true. It's almost impossible that we as humans, I mean, we can manipulate the virus, we can manipulate the genetic material, but we cannot create a new virus, and especially not as a good virus as this one. So, so what is this Chinese scientist was saying about this is that she was able to basically deconvolute the genome of this virus, and she was just basically showing that you can just basically recreate this. But actually that didn't really make much sense. So of course we have the technical means to be able to clone these kind of viruses, but we don't have the intellectual capability or capacity to be able to create this. And one point, so this virus is good, it can infect humans, but actually it's not the perfect virus to infect humans. So there's still like even more space to this virus to improve, to be able to infect humans better. So, I mean, if we are going to create a virus, why don't you make the perfect one and not just one, which is going to be quite in the middle, right? But actually the normal things are all these viruses and most the coronaviruses that has been causes all these kind of problems in humans, like SARS or MERS in the near past actually are coming from animals. So why not to think it's going to come from an animal? I think one of the problems so far is that we haven't been able to find what is like the intermediate host that has been between the bat and us. And this is one of the things that we really need to look for, especially because otherwise we will still have this kind of new outbreaks of this virus in the near future if we cannot kind of contain the animal host of this.
Right. So to summarize, such a perfect killing machine cannot be something created. It's only nature can be responsible of something like this. What do you think about Nerea's answer, Carlos?
Well, I think I completely agree with her. I think when you clone a virus, you can see it because you sequence it and you know how sequences were patched together. I'm surprised that people like Luc Montagnier, who was my old boss when I was doing my postdoc at Pasteur Institute, came up with that conclusion, but I think it's very, very unlikely. To Nerea's point, if you want to really come up with a bioorganism, I would have gone to a swine flu, where it's going to be very aggressive. No one has seen it before. And then, as I said before, it's going to change every 2 weeks. And then vaccine will never work because it will be mutating. And so I think this was just a nature. And again, it was typical zoonosis type of infection.
Also, I want to ask a last question from this blog to both of you, and then we open the floor for the audience. Was the fact that we were going to suffer a global pandemic because of an emerging new virus predictable? Well, what should we learn about all this situation? So, Carlos, for instance, you can answer.
Well, I can I can give you the US version. Is that the previous administration had rightly predicted that we were going to have another pandemic sometime soon. They were more thinking of the flu type or a swine flu or a bird flu. And everything was in theory drafted as to how to react to that. But at the same time, it's like you plan for contingencies, but at the end, you're not really ready. So I think every civilized country was ready for this. The WHO was obviously ready for this. But despite being ready, as we all see, it's not sufficient. So I hope that this one wakes up all of us. And then as we move forward, if we can handle this one within the next, maybe hopefully 12 more months left, to some degree, we will be ready. And to the discussion we're having before, there's enough funds by governments to be able to get ready for diagnostics, for health, public health systems, to be available for that, but it's a pity. Everyone was waiting for it, and when it came, no one really reacted the right way, except some countries.
Right, Nerea, you want to add something?
Yeah, just basically that if we were thinking about a pandemic, I think that we never thought it was going to be coronavirus. Although it has been like these two coronaviruses just making like small outbreaks. But I do agree with Carlos that if we were thinking about a real pandemic, that would have been flu, and especially because flu is able, so it comes from different organisms, so it can just basically kind of recombine into a new virus. And as he said, it's just changing so much that would be quite difficult to deal with.
Okay, so now I'm gonna give time for the audience to write some questions. I have already two questions in the chat. I can either ask the question or give you the microphone, and so you can ask if you want. I begin with well, I don't know. Nicholas is the first one that sent us the question for Nerea. Otherwise, if he's not saying anything, I'm gonna ask the question.
Well, Nicholas is me.
Oh,
sorry,
right.
my name is María Jose, but I'm using my husband's account. Sorry.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's written actually. It's María Jose Martinez. Sorry, María Jose.
Yeah,
if you want,
exactly.
well, the floor is yours. You can ask your question to Nerea.
Thank you, very kind. No, I mean, I'm just going to read the question. It's basically a question for Nerea, asking her if it's possible, actually, that could we somehow wish that the virus is going to mutate again and kind of stop being as infective as it is right now and moving to a much less infective strain than the one we are enjoying right now?
Well, how do viruses behave? They do tend to adapt more to their host, in this case humans, and then with time they do tend to lose infectivity and pathogenicity. The only thing is coronaviruses, they don't mutate so much, so they don't tend to accumulate mutations, so probably they will take much longer for a virus as coronavirus. But in virology terms, they don't normally start to lose like some of the virulence. So they're less infective and less pathogenic for us because they do tend to adapt more with the host. So we need to think that actually viruses don't really want to kill their host, because if you kill your host very soon, then you're also dead as a virus. So they would tend to maintain a balance between that.
There is another question for you, Nerea. They're asking if the potentially the COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 can go back to animals, if we can infect, human can infect animals with our new mutated virus.
Well, I think this is what is happening, right? With some of the pets and some seems like felines, like cats or tigers and panthers. There have been like some cases in which the person owning the pet or the guards in a zoo have been able to infect the animals. And also, I think it has been also a problem with minks as well in all these farms that have been infected. So I think that can go both ways. The only thing, and I think that even minks are also able to infect us as well. So, I mean, these species jumps can be a bit tricky and can be potentially quite dangerous. But the good thing with coronavirus is they don't tend to mutate quite a lot.
Right. Also, Julia is asking, I think, for Carlos, do you think we have all been exposed to COVID? And if so, are we immune?
So two great questions. The answer is that for this new virus, apparently around maybe 10% of the population in areas where there has been enough infection rate have been exposed thus far. So 10% is not much. That means that if we were to get the society protected, you need to get to that magic number of 50 to 60%, the minimum. So if there was no vaccine ever, which we'll talk later, the way that people the society and the community can control the virus is that where 50 to 60% of all of us have become infected. That's kind of the norm from the public health perspective. So we still have a long way to go. That has been what people call the herd immunity. And that's what Sweden has tried to argue for, and they're not there yet. And as you know, it hasn't been a very fruitful experiment. And I think the UK also started with that kind of philosophy for a few days until they changed. That's one approach, and that tells you that not more than 10, 15% maybe have been infected. The one thing that's very, very important is that there are what we call cross immunity. There are beautiful papers in papers like Cell over the last 2 or 3 months, which have shown that the common coronavirus or the common cold virus, which is what Nerea was referring to, many of us have been exposed to those, and some of the proteins share homology with the COVID-19 virus. And so they claim that maybe 10% of all the people in the world have already some degree of immunity against that common cold that we get every year that could be somehow protective against the COVID-19. It's not perfect protection, it's not as good as it would be, but there is already some immunity. So that could also explain why some people may get exposed to the virus and have no symptoms, because they may have already, in a way, been vaccinated by the fact that they were infected 3 winters ago with a common cold. And the second question is a very important one, is if you get infected, are you protected for life? And then the best examples we have are from the 2 other epidemics, which were cousins of COVID. One was the SARS and the MERS. SARS and MERS. Those showed us that you could get immunity up to 3 years. So they did some follow-up of those patients. And so it's pretty flimsy data, but it tells us that if we were to have natural infection and we recover well, or if we get a good vaccine and we kind of get the right immune response, there is hope that this is not just going to last for a few weeks, but it's likely to last for at least some years. Not for life, but at least for 2 or 3 years. That's kind of the data we have today. So I hope we answered your question.
Right. There is another question. Also, I think very important, because Juan is asking why the SARS-CoV-2 is spreading so quick, and if we compare with other similar viruses like the SARS or the MERS virus. I think Nerea has already answered that question before, but if you want to say something else, Nerea?
Well, basically it spreads much better because it's less lethal. So people are not dying. So, I mean, if you compare what is the lethality of SARS was 10%, MERS is roughly 40%. This one is between 1 and 2%. And then if we take umbrella, knowing that it's going to be more cases or more positive cases, that the ones it's detected would be even less. So it kills less, and also it can be spread when you don't have any symptoms. So this is one of a key thing that, I mean, you are infected, you are spreading the virus, you don't have any symptoms, and then, well, you have an outbreak.
Right. Okay. So let's move to the next block of questions. I know there are more questions, but maybe we can try to find a bit of more time at the end. So now we're going to talk about prevention strategies and treatments that are also very important to know. How to fight the virus and its consequences. There are different strategies for prevention to avoid virus to infect and damage people, and also treatments either to kill the virus or to avoid the consequences. So Carlos, there are different strategies, we say, fighting the virus. However, infections all over the world are increasing day after day. What do you think about the measures to prevent infection, and why mask and social distancing is so important?
Okay, so we know, like any other virus, we have to find how they transmit. And to date, the information we have is it's airborne transmission, and you all have heard the aerosols and all the things. And so doesn't exclude that we may have transmission through the fecal route, meaning orally. It doesn't exclude that we can get infected by touching surfaces that have been infected. So all those are possible, and we should be mindful. But I think if you have to take one, is the social distance or physical distance and mask wearing, especially if you are a vulnerable person. Use an N95 or FFP2. That's the one that will protect you. The ones that we call surgical masks will be helpful for you if you're infected, not to pass it to others, but doesn't protect you whatsoever. So be mindful of what kind of mask you use depending what kind of person you are. So let's say that you have done all the right things, but you got infected. So the first thing that we can do is to try to block how the virus works and replicates. As Nerea knows very well, these viruses need to get inside a cell to get copies of themselves. And so there's drugs called antivirals. These are just like you take an antibiotic, it's like taking an antiviral. So the same drugs we use to treat HIV, you could treat, for example, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 with an antiviral. The only one out there that has been made to the market is remdesivir, as you all know. It's an IV drug, so you cannot take it by mouth. And we know with these respiratory viruses that you need to act very, very quickly. If you get remdesivir once you have had the virus going on for a long time, which is when you get the symptoms and you get to the hospital, giving remdesivir may shorten your hospital stay, but it really doesn't cut down the overall mortality. And so that's one example where you should be using antivirals much earlier. The hope would be that one day we have an oral agent where you get a sneeze, you get a PCR, and within 2 hours you're told you're positive, then you take an antiviral by mouth before you get too much viral replication. That would be the hope. We're not there yet, and I don't think remdesivir will be the solution. The other way to combat the virus, aside of attacking where it replicates in the cell, is to use what you will see is hearing a lot in the future are monoclonal antibodies. The virus, when it goes out of a cell and goes and infects another cell, somehow is free on the blood, if you want to call it that way. And so if you all can get administered an antibody that detects the virus outside part, it's called the surface of the virus, you can block that virus when it goes between cell to cell. And that is what famous Donald Trump got as an experimental therapy. And there's a number of companies getting and going and testing whether either monoclonal antibodies or plasma blood transfusions from patients that have been infected that contain those antibodies could potentially work. So those are the two legs of the stool to treat a virus at the beginning of the stage. Let's say that you were unable to get protected, you got infected, you didn't get an antibody, or you didn't get an antiviral, and now the virus is just rampant. The next step is to now treat the patient with avoiding those complications we were talking about, inflammation. And that's where drugs that block inflammation are so important. You have a little bit of knowledge now that steroids, an example, dexamethasone, can significantly block some mortality in some patients, especially the most sick ones. There are other drugs being tested, like old anti-inflammatory agents like colchicine or others. Those could have some potential role in decreasing those complications. Also, people are getting right now anticoagulants. People were, like Eduardo was mentioning, many people die from some clots, whether big clots or small clots around the body. So if you had some way to inhibit that, so getting things like heparin or aspirin, even in the outpatient setting, may have some potential role there. So I think those are the three buckets. Think of what you can do to get protected and never get infected. If you have the virus, try to attack the virus through antivirals or monoclonal antibodies or co-antibodies. And thirdly, if you can not get over them and you get more virus, and then before it gets too much inflammation, then try to block inflammation. That's kind of, I think, the trend of what you see today of trials and new drugs going. You'll be seeing old drugs being repurposed. You'll see hopefully new drugs. I know Merck is working on a new antiviral that will be oral. And if they can fast track that one, maybe that would be much better than remdesivir. So these are the things that we have to be hopeful for.
That's a good answer. Actually, I think you answered three of my questions in a row. So yeah, it's perfect. We can save some time. But Nerea, why is so difficult to find therapies that are able to kill the virus?
Well, I think it's one of the things that we said before. So this virus has the protein that is actually replicating the genetic material of the virus. It has what is called high fidelity. So that means it doesn't make any mistakes. So it's quite rare for the virus to make a mistake. And for example, remdesivir is a drug that actually is kind of somehow intercalated into the genetic material. But because this protein, which is just replicating the genetic material, doesn't like to take these random things, it's a bit difficult for this protein to be cheated and just to include remdesivir into the genetic material. So this is why and actually these kind of drugs like remdesivir has been the ones that have been broadly used, for example, for HIV and some other viruses. But that's something that is going to be quite difficult for coronavirus to take. It has an effect, but it's not a massive one. So also another problem with viruses is because they're just basically hijacking all the machinery of the cell to be able to survive. Everything that we find or we try to fight is going to be fighting our own cells. So this is super tricky just to find like proteins that are only belonging to the virus or that may have some activity. So this is why it's a bit difficult trying to find antivirals.
Right, and any other promising options coming soon, as you know, or I mean, in your opinion, what will be the perfect strategy to fight the virus? I mean, only the virus, not the disease.
So I think that if you have all the proteins of the virus that might have some activity in the cell, like a protease, for example, which is a protein that cuts other bits of other proteins, right? So for example, targeting proteases, viral proteases would be like a very good strategy because it's something that is only targeting a viral protein and not that cellular protein.
Right, it's like destroying the weapons of the virus.
Yeah. So that would be probably the best options. Other things that we can do is just targeting because the virus is always causing things to the cell, right? So it's making the cell to react, like upregulating or downregulating some of their genes or proteins. So if we can even interfere with those cellular pathways, we can always, or we can try to reduce the amount of the virus as well. So maybe another avenue to explore.
Right, so either to kill the virus, I mean, kill the weapons of the virus, or make the host cells to kill the virus or to avoid the virus.
Yeah, just to avoid the problems, the pathogenicity.
And probably to make the cells able to avoid the virus to replicate and spread or to, I mean, grow and spread to other cells, neighbor cells, or.
Yeah, well, the idea is just basically just to prevent the replication of the virus. And we can just either, targeting the virus itself or just targeting bits of the cells that are needed for the replication of the virus.
Right. So prevention, fighting the virus and to kill the virus, and also treating the symptoms like the inflammation, treating the coagulation, but the most important is prevention, because I mean, now that we still don't have a vaccine, the social distancing and the mask is very important. What do you think about what citizens and governments are doing? Are we doing what we should be doing? Are we doing everything is in our hands? When I say we, I mean also governments, right? What was your opinion, Carlos?
So in any epidemic or pandemic, there is something you never want to get to, which is what they call community transmission. And that's what we got back in the spring, that except for some countries, and we'll talk about what countries have done well or not. Once you have community transmission, meaning you don't know where the case came from, then you have to do these very severe restrictions of mobility and lockdowns and so on, in addition to the mask. The thing that we have missed is once you got over that, remember the curve went down significantly back in June, July. That is the time where the good countries, call them examples initially, like Hong Kong, South Korea, Taiwan, New Zealand. What they do is once your number of patients' infections are very low, then you start surveying everyone. You do PCR to everyone. You ask them to stay home for 10 to 14 days until they are. So the idea is to have less than one person transmitting the virus to another. So that's how this works. At the beginning, back in the spring, you had countries that did exactly that. In the moment they knew there was the virus was showing up, they started doing very aggressive surveillance through PCR and then putting people in quarantine. Those were the most successful countries. And some of them didn't even have to go to a lockdown, which has, as you all huge economical implications. Countries like the ones we all live now did not do a very good job. They went very quick into transmission of the community, and then we have missed the opportunity after all those deaths and all that hardship economically to not spend the summertime getting not only people educated and wearing masks and social distancing, but we were not aggressive in doing PCRs to everyone and isolating them. So we are now back into what we saw in the spring. We are not going to lock down anyone because economically that's not going to be feasible. And so you will see countries that will be most effective in trying to control this through surveillance and PCRing everyone versus those that will not happen that way. So that's kind of where you see, but you have China as the biggest country together with India in the world, and they have a handful of cases every day. And they are, I mean, they went into the most severe lockdown, as you cannot know, but their economy was growing, I think, 5% GDP the last quarter. So that gives you the example of how you can manage as a government one way or the other.
Yeah, I recently had the opportunity to interview a scientist that is a Spanish scientist working in China, and he was able to come back to China after a while of time lockdown here in Spain, and he was surprised because in China people are doing normal life. They don't even they don't have any lockdown, any mask wearing, whatever. But just in the moment that one person gets the virus, it gets completely isolated, and even the neighborhood is completely isolated, so they don't allow the virus to spread. I think this probably, as you said, as we can learn from other countries that are controlling the disease, avoiding the contact to virus and escaping from the disease is the best treatment. So there is also questions from the audience. Julia, I don't know if you want to raise your question. I think it's very relevant. If you switch on your microphone, you can ask. Otherwise, if you don't want, I will do it. Yep. No, well.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. So I need to take the flu jab, but does this make me vulnerable to catch COVID?
No, just the opposite. I mean, I think the flu, as I mentioned before, can make your immune system even weaker, even though you could be young. And so if you were to get the flu and then get the COVID, you probably would be much worse getting the COVID after you got the flu. So anything that protects you from the flu, I would take it. And so as we mentioned, the symptoms are very difficult to differentiate also. So I think if you already have a flu vaccine that hopefully was effective, then if you get similar symptoms later on, it's most likely that it's not the flu, but something else, and it could be COVID. So that also helps both the physician and helps you. So I would for sure encourage you to take the flu vaccine. Now, I was talking to some friends in Australia. They're just getting over their winter. And as you know, the flu virus goes back and forth between the North and the South Hemisphere. And so we're getting into our winter here in the North Hemisphere. There's been very, very, very little flu cases in Australia, for example. And that's why everyone was locked down. Everyone was wearing masks. And thirdly, no one's flying from Australia to London anymore. And so you are going to see very little, hopefully, I'm just crossing my fingers, less flu infections this year. But even then, I would say I'm getting my flu vaccine next Wednesday as quickly as I can to be protected. Like if I could get a COVID vaccine, I would get it very quickly. So yeah, go ahead and get it. And it should be just the opposite. It should help you, it should not make it worse.
Right. That was a perfect question to open the last block of questions. But I give you a moment if you want to raise any other question. Yeah, there is a question. I'm gonna ask. So it says Andorra was the first country to do massive testing, so the PCRs, and was applauded as a good approach, but is now the country with the highest ratio of infections. They seem to do things right, but have allowed tourists to come in who it appears to have brought the virus back in and spread it. There's more a comment rather than a question, but what do you think about that in fact?
No, I'll answer that quickly. I think it's not just doing PCRs, it's really doing the PCR and isolating people. I mean, I can tell you from the chat I have from my medical school, people get PCR positive and they don't get isolated. They just don't want to, and we don't have enough policemen in the world to make every sure there. So it has to be a PCR. You have to really make sure people get isolated. And then to your point, if you import cases, you have to treat them the same way. And so I think they have to go hand in hand. And that would be my explanation as to, for example, why New Zealand is doing so well, because they're doing both things, or China is doing both things. Other countries do half of them, which is better than nothing.
Right. There are a couple of comments and questions about Donald Trump. I'm gonna ask these questions because I think it's very relevant. So if is telling us to make the big if Donald Trump actually had COVID-19, was the cocktail of drugs he was given safe? That was a good question, because he received, if you know, anticoagulants. He received also anti-inflammatory drugs. He received remdesivir, and also the cocktail of antibodies from the company Regeneron. Well, what do you think about this cocktail of antibodies? Is it safe? Because it's still, as far as I know, it's not going to clinical trials, to big phase 3 or phase 2 clinical trials, isn't it?
Yeah, they're in phase 2 now. Yeah, I think it's both. Eli Lilly has one set of antibodies and Regeneron is the other one. There's no reason to think they're not safe from that perspective. You have the presence of another respiratory virus called RSV that causes severe pneumonia on neonates. And those kids survive in the ICU because they get an antibody against the virus. And so there's a lot of precedence already of having that approach work in a different virus. So I think this is better. The Trump example is a situation where it's better than what we had in the spring. When I was seeing my colleagues treat patients in the spring, they were getting chloroquine, they were getting protease inhibitors for HIV, they were getting things that we have now learned don't work and probably get you even worse, right? They can make your heart rhythm much worse. And so I think what Trump's timing was good. It's better to get infected in October than get it in spring, because I think what they gave him was much more directed to what we know the virus causes now that we didn't do before. So now, did he get better? He apparently got better physically. I don't know, mentally. I leave that up to you guys, but you never know. I would have done the same if I was him. I would have got that cocktail. And there's another drug called interferon that I would also use. There's many cases of people that have mutations on the interferon gene. And these are young people in their 30s that are dying or died in Europe because they had a mutation on interferon. That tells you that if you don't make interferon when you get a virus, you may not get a good outcome. And so those are things that are already on the market. And so those are the things that people are now getting that people couldn't get back in the spring because we didn't know about.
Mm-hmm. Nerea, any comment about Donald Trump, or do you want us to go through the next block?
No, I think what Carlos said was perfect.
Right, okay. So let's talk about vaccines and future perspectives, okay? The great white hope to win the battle against COVID-19 is having a vaccine, right? So, however, in the last few days, we're hearing news about volunteers with rare secondary effects because of the vaccines or even deaths. So what are the vaccines that are now currently under clinical trials? And so are you optimistic looking at the results of the clinical trials, Carlos?
Yes, I am. What we know right now is that they are making the right type of immune response we want to see in patients, right? They're making both antibodies, and in some times, especially the one from Oxford, is also making T cells. So it's not just the antibody that could be good, but you ideally get both, especially older people. They need both T cells, antibodies, and T cells, the lymphocytes. So I think they're what we have seen so far, they're doing their job. So I'm hopeful that when they get beyond the last stage of testing, which is now the phase 3, which is where you have to test, say, 60,000 people, etc., that they show to be safe, right? I'll give you 2 examples. We have HIV since 1983, right? And we have no vaccine yet, right? And we put every single dollar and pound or euro into HIV vaccines and we don't have them. So there's never a warranty that you're going to get one. At the same time, we have vaccines like against the RSV virus that can be very toxic. I mean, they had to stop the development of a vaccine because the people were getting huge asthma after that because they were mimicking so much the viral protein that they are. So based on where we are and having already, say, passed the phase 1 and the phase 2, I think they're going to be safe. It's never 100% safe. So you're going to have a number of side effects. And really, to be honest, in vaccine world, you start seeing the side effects once it's on the market. So testing 60,000 patients and say it's safe is not for sure safe. Tell me when 2 million people have been exposed, and then I can tell you what's there.
Right.
But the risk benefit is really helpful for the vaccine. So I would no doubt, despite everything you're hearing, I would hopefully have more than one vaccine that works and we can choose from. Giving the vaccine to the whole world is going to be difficult, a logistic problem no one talks about. Our poor country is going to get a vaccine. Africa is going to get a vaccine. Who's going to get it first will be an issue, but I am hopeful based on what I have seen so far.
Wow, I'm happy to hear this because we, as I said, we're hearing a lot of secondary effects, and even this week, a volunteer, a young man, volunteering from Brazil in the AstraZeneca vaccine clinical trial has passed away. Nerea, have you heard about that? And what do you think about it? It's good to have this kind of, good, understand what I mean. Somehow this is something normal, something common in these trials. What can you say about that?
Well, I think that it's normal just to have the clinical trial, and it's good to do that, especially when there are things that you don't really know about what is happening, right? It was with the AstraZeneca one, it seems that there was some side effects like transfer myelitis, and once you have a big effect, you really need to investigate into what is happening, and if that is coming from the vaccine or if that's something that is happening to the patient, even though. So I think that it's important to know that clinical trials do tend to be halted, and it's good because we are investigating what is really happening, because what we want to deliver is a safe vaccine, and then we will check the efficacy of the vaccine. I think what was happening with the Brazilian guy that died like these days is, I think he was in the placebo group. So every time that we are testing only with the clinical trials, you have a placebo group in which they have a related, it has a different vaccine, and then you have the vaccine that you want to be tested. And this is why they haven't halted the clinical trials in Brazil. So it's sad because the guy passed away of COVID, but it was not, seems that it was not due to the vaccine because he had the placebo one.
So I want to highlight two things to the audience that I think is really important because of the news arrives and then you don't understand everything and people get confused, and it's normal. Secondary effects doesn't mean that are really coming from the vaccine, but they need to stop the trial for some time to be sure that if the secondary effect is because of the vaccine or not. Probably could be a disease like one day you wake up and you learn you are diabetic, for instance, or you have a rare reaction, and once they are sure, they reopen the trial. And also the placebo group. I mean, this is so important. Placebo group doesn't receive any vaccine or treatment. So somehow that this, people having the disease and dying because of the disease in the placebo group will be similar to people who is not getting any kind of vaccine. So this is pretty important for the audience to know.
But I also, sorry, Eduardo, I would like to say that because these days we know so much about the clinical trials, we are just basically reporting like real time. And probably this is not what has normally happened in the past. So every time, so we know what is really happening with each of the clinical trial every day. And probably that's a bit too much as us, as the public audience. Like, do we really need to know all of this?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. There's another comment I would like to make for everyone to think about is I would say 90% of the vaccines that are being developed, which is roughly now 200 over the world, they are all trying to express inside the patient the spike protein. This is the protein that is the outer protein on the membrane. Imagine a circle and this spike coming out. We don't know really what the spike protein does when the virus uses it naturally. To Nerea's point, these viruses they use their own proteins to make other things happen in the body. So it is possible, theoretically possible, that if you overexpress, meaning you have such a wonderful, powerful vaccine that makes tons of artificial spike protein, that amount of spike protein could cause some problems in the patient, like the virus would normally cause in addition to many others. So that's kind of a bit of a bet that the scientific community is doing, is that we have to demonstrate that expressing that F protein within a vaccine, that spike protein, is not going to be harmful. And that's why I was trying to say that I'm hopeful that after, say, 30,000 patients, more or less, on the top 4 or 5 vaccines, we have not seen something already saying it's not safe. And that's kind of where I'm reassured.
Right. Okay, there is a question from the audience. Roger, would you like to ask the question? You need to activate your microphone if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but my interest, I'm curious as to how the laboratories and the universities coordinate their research. Is it sort of anarchy, everyone just doing their own thing, or is there some sort of grand brain coordinating so that we get the best use of resources? And in that context, I was interested into whether the laws about intellectual property protection and the various commercial interests, is that helping or hindering the speed of research? And do we need to worry about these stories of states trying to thieve research and formulae from other places? I mean, is actually that a problem? Is it a real problem or not? Really,
Who want to answer?
I can start, and maybe Nerea, you want to follow, but I would say your question is very important. I would say it was very striking to see Oxford University team up with a big, large pharma like AstraZeneca. So whatever IP, intellectual property agreement they have, it worked obviously because they were able to do that very quickly. And I mean, really kudos to them to do it that way, right? So that's there. One thing that we have also seen is that, to Nerea's point before, this open source of information has been huge, and everyone has ramped up to collaborate. You haven't seen turfs between University A or University B. I've seen a huge push by even governments like the NIH of the States working with the MRC or working with the European Union to get trials across US and Europe very quickly without worrying about too much about that. So I think this has been a real revolution of collaboration, of again, goodwill. And then the last answer to your question about how governments, there was a very famous case where you had this biotech in Germany called CureVac that Trump invited the CEO to the White House and wanted to buy the company right there. And then Merkel said, no way you're going to buy this company. So you had those kind of examples where people were trying to monopolize. And I think they're still doing it. I think there's a sense of anguish by governments if they have to provide vaccines to everyone in their country. Where are they going to get it from? So I don't think the deals that have been signed so far are going to be sufficient to be able to guarantee whether you pay or not for the vaccine, who gets it. And so I think that's an unanswered question, like the same as supply. How can you get an RNA vaccine that has to be at -70 delivered throughout Africa, where you cannot even deliver at -4? So those are things that we have to keep in mind. Nerea, maybe you have.
Yeah, I think the collaboration has been huge between all the scientists. So I think that probably that was something that has never seen before. Like suddenly everyone wanted to help with this. Also has been good response from governments, just releasing quite a lot of funding, like for rapid response and things like that. Also, for example, University of Cambridge, you cannot patent anything that is going to be just for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 because that has to be open access. So that would just help other countries or other people to get access to it. But yeah, I think that We are trying to do the best that we can, but also we need to say, because I think that sometimes it feels like, well, we have been with this pandemic for the last 9 months, and it seems that scientists are not doing their best, or they just don't have a vaccine or a treatment. And I would like to say that science do tend to have like a slower pace compared to the one that we are seeing right now. To have a vaccine, or even vaccine clinical in phase 3, is just in such a short time is like a massive revolution for science as well. So I think that we are doing the best that we can, that we have also having like lots of restrictions while working in the lab. For example, in my lab, we were not able to go up to 30% occupancy for 7 months. So that has been like a huge, many difficulties for us also to be able to tackle the pandemic. So I think that we are trying to do our best. And I think that we are a bit all into this, as this is just a worldwide problem so far.
An important question raised by Remy, I think is very important. So it's related to the fact that we, and if I understood well, we are always watching news about the development of the vaccine or new treatments. And do you think this is allowing people to get more knowledge and be more comfortable with the clinical trials?
I'll answer that. I think people now understand that you require a number of steps in your clinical trials. So I think there has been an increased knowledge. I don't think the governments have done, or academicians have done a great job yet in doing that. But I think there's been overall knowledge. Again, just watching the US news, the more educated people can now understand what a phase 3 means and what repurposing of drugs means, etc. So I think there's been increased knowledge about this. At the same time, as you know, every time you get increased knowledge, you get increased skepticism. So you have the anti-vaccine camp also ramping up. And to your comments before, those things don't help when you have a side effect that's completely normal to having a trial. Mm-hmm. So it goes both ways.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Also, I want to say that if there is anyone who wants to ask something, I think I forgot to ask a question that Jimmy was raising at the beginning. So Jimmy, you want to take the microphone, please? Sweetie, okay. And so you can raise the question to the speakers.
You're in mute, I think.
No? You are mute.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Eduardo, for coming in. Yeah, I did. I put this on the chat early on, but I didn't want to sort of put a dampener on it with this optimism among academics and sharing information and all that. I just wanted to put particularly to Carlos, but then Nerea, but the global action. I mean, how can we have really global action on this at a political level when we've got a president of the United States like Trump and countries like Russia and China, which actually, as you well know, vaccinating people without proper trials. I mean, Nerea, you talked to quite rightly about the huge cooperation at EU level and between other countries, but you've got these three great power blocks politically at odds with each other. Carlos, you're right in the middle of it. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think at the working level of scientists, there has been huge collaboration. So I can just tell you that the head of the NIH, Francis Collins, has done a huge job trying to get the equivalent at other agencies in the US, in Europe, as well as China and Asia to collaborate. So, and there's been a real demonstrated effort in collaboration. I think where it gets messed up is when you go one level higher and you get into the political leaders, where there's been a huge amount of what you've seen. I think the PTO here has been a missed opportunity by the WHO. The WHO is, in theory, the supranational agency where you could get all these. They did a great job in Geneva back in March, getting everyone in the world together to discuss what do we do together, right? So there's no better incentive to doing that. All that got fizzled out by the by the, as you know, the issue of China hiding data to the US, to the WHO, Trump doing what they're doing. So I think I would say at the policy level of scientific investigation and collaboration is being stellar. At the level of politicians blocking that, that's what you have seen. So that has diluted the WHO. The WHO has become, I think, incompetent based on all these political struggles. So now you rely on a few goodwill countries to be able to collaborate to some degree. And I think the openness of information sharing is the way to counteract that. So the fact that you can get results of a vaccine in 24 hours without having the Chinese government blocking it, it's helpful, right? So that's kind of, I think, how we're going to get around it. But I think this has shown who's a good leader, who's not a good leader, both at the government level, trying to help their country, and then help the worldwide level.
Good. So Nerea, you want to add anything?
I do agree with Carlos. Like,
Right,
I think
okay.
that the collaboration has been huge among scientists, but yeah, when you go into politicians, they have just been using the virus as a political weapon.
Mm-hmm. So we're coming to the end. I think we have to wrap up, but still we have some questions. I don't know. I mean, if the organizers want us to keep asking questions, otherwise I have to ask the last. Okay, so there have been some companies who have taken advantage of COVID, spreading information that promotes their own business. For instance, the credit card business, who have been saying that banknotes carry the virus. The reality is different, but the World Health Organization should shut down these rumors, which are not helpful. What does the panel think of the spreading of fake news? Wow, such a massive question for a comment. Please be, I mean, short answer, please. Otherwise, we'll never. No, it's a good question, I have to say.
Yeah,
it's a
I would say fake news are there to stay. It's not going to go away. It's the new way of communicating, and I think it really relies on all of us to be thoughtful where we get the information from. It's true that any pandemic, separate from whether they're fake or not, everyone tries to make a money out of this, and so you see biotechs hyping their results, and I mean that happens all the time. But unfortunately, the fake news are there to stay, and we have to just, as you know, they're being used politically for elections. We have interference going on right now from Iran and Russia in the US, nothing new, and who knows if that affects an election, and maybe it happens everywhere. So it's not just making money through fake news, it's controlling the future. I think Eduardo got frozen.
Yeah, I think that he has frozen. Well, I would like to say, like,
I come back.
Okay.
Yes, for the five last minutes, I can. Okay, finish. Sorry.
No, I think that also fake news they have been actually quite interesting since the beginning of the pandemic, just to see how was the origin of the virus, like how it was created in a lab, how it was recombination with HIV. So I mean, it has been like, in terms of as a tale, has been quite interesting. But I think that we should be sure that we are following the correct sources and not just trying to spread things. And I think that now with all our smartphones, and you can be sending WhatsApps or audios and everything. So this kind of fake news have been spread like quite a lot. And it's good to know like some of the social media, such as Facebook or Twitter, are just kind of reviewing what is really happening and not to let people post tweets that do contain fake news, which is I think it's quite useful.
But I think that this pandemic has highlighted how vulnerable we are to the fake news, and some people call it infodemics, like the problem of bad information. No, so I think we only can allow one last question, just in case someone has an important question that cannot go bad without asking. Otherwise, we will wrap up. And is there anyone in the audience that want to ask the last question? No, right. So Nerea and Carlos, I wanted to ask you about a final remarks. So, but please very brief because we have to close the Q&A session and say goodbye to everybody. But just a few words about how you see the future. Is there any recommendation?
Yeah. Stay safe, please. This is going to last for a bit longer, probably another year until we have like a good vaccine, and we have vulnerable people just vaccinated. So please stay safe and yeah, and be patient. We will go over this.
Carlos?
Yeah. Comments is I'm scared. I'm being very careful how I live my life now, and so it's there, and it gets psychologically tiring. We haven't talked about that. But this up and down and not being able to see your family or whatever and being at risk of quote death is really unnerving, and it's going to cause a huge amount of cost to the society regarding their behavior. And the last comment is, again, while I want to be optimistic, is be mindful that this virus will not go away. Even if we have a vaccine, we're going to have to live with this virus for a while. Vaccines are not 100% protective. Again, we need to get over 60% of the population infected or exposed to a vaccine. So I predict that this virus will be around for much longer than what we all wanted initially, which was 18 months. I mean, we've seen it with other pandemics. They don't go completely away when they're at this level of community spread. So be mindful, this is a marathon. It's not just a short race. And so don't get too depressed if we're living with this for a few more years. But it will be better a year from now than it's today, for sure. But it will not be out of our lives.
Right. So yeah, indeed, there are a lot of subjects that we could rise, but it is impossible in only just an hour. Really want to thank you, Carlos and Nerea, because it has been a genuine pleasure to share this time with you. And also thank you, the British Spanish Society and the Society of Spanish Researchers in the United Kingdom. Thanks to the sponsor and big thanks to all the people that make this event possible, from people who work in the event, also Justin, who is the Zoom manager, and very helpful, all the people. Really, thank you. And last but not least, thank you for your participation. It's been a pleasure to moderate all your very interesting questions. And yes, and thanks for supporting the British Spanish Society with donations. And please do not hesitate to join us and to follow the charity for more information. That's it.
Eduardo, and on behalf of the British Spanish Society as well, could I just thank you for doing a superb job of chairing the discussion this evening, and also thank Carlos and Nerea for really interesting insights. Yeah, shame we have to finish early, and more of a shame that we have to be patient and wait a long time perhaps for this horrible thing to go away. Very briefly on a lighter note, or maybe not, I don't know, because the topic of our next Zoom panel discussion, if I can very quickly give it a plug to the people on the call, the British Spanish Society's next online event will be on Tuesday the 10th of November, 6:30 p.m. It will be, Jimmy Burns will be interviewing Sir Paul Preston about the historical perspective of, well, from Spanish flu to COVID in Spain. So I think that'll put COVID in a quite an interesting light that perhaps we haven't considered before. So please do join us for that if you're able. Details are on the events page of the Society's website. But yeah, thank you very much to, as I say, to Eduardo, Carlos and Nerea, and thank you everybody who attended.
Thank you. Bye-bye.